introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Tom. So thank you, Scott. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce Tom. As you saw from the announcement, he is a senior advisor to the Tsai Foundation. This foundation was founded by Joe Tsai and his wife, Clara Tsai. And Joe is the co-founder of the global internet technology company that most of you will know, Alibaba. And his wife is a Taiwanese descendant, US-born citizen who is very much interested in the creation of new knowledge. And so the Tsai Foundation has established a wonderful record of interest in science, technology, social justice, economic mobility, arts and cultures in form of several institutes and initiatives across the country. The latest one is the Wu-Tsai Human Performance Alliance between UCSD, Salk Institute, University of Oregon, Stanford, University of Kansas, and Harvard Medical School. And so Tom is having a broad impact as the senior advisor on how bioengineering is developing. And this is on top of what he did previously before he joined the foundation in the period between 2015 and 18, where he was the founding executive director of the Paul Allen Frontiers Group in Seattle. And what Tom did at that time is to introduce ways to advance science at the frontiers. He did it quite specifically by establishing the Allen Discovery Center and also the Allen Distinguished Investigator Awards that have moved particular areas of science in a very impressive way. This is quite a list of achievements and shows Tom's broad thinking about how science can move. Unfortunately, Paul Allen passed away in 2018. And prior to that, Tom was actually the vice president of the University of Virginia. He had joined the Department of Bioengineering at the University of Virginia, became its chair, and then again was already at that time seeking the broader picture in bioengineering, other than just a single individual research activity in a particular department. He was the founder of the University of Virginia Calder Foundation Translational Research Partnership, and he needs to be given the credit that, in fact, this activity led to the recognition that the Charlottesville region was regarded by the National Venture Capital Association as the #1 fastest growing venture capital ecosystem in the United States. So as you can see from these parts of his CV, Tom Skalak has established a national record to think in a visionary way about our evolving discipline. He has served in various institutions, including the American Institute of Medical and Biological Engineering as its president, also as the president of the Biomedical Engineering Society. He currently is chair of the External Advisory Council of the MIT Science Technology Center, and he is a council member of the Government University Industry Research Roundtable of the National Academy of the US National Academies. So Tom was recognized as this visionary because he had the distinct honor to be accepted as a resident artist at the Gigerassi Resident Artist Program in Northern California. That's a program where an artist or a scientist has an opportunity to carry out and focus on, say, the writing of a book and thinking about the future, unconstrained by anything else. Tom has started, as Scott already pointed out, his career at the University of Columbia, at Johns Hopkins University, and he received his PhD degree at the UCSD. So Tom is a unique bioengineer in our community. And I think we will hear today a great deal about the future directions, expanding the frontiers of bioengineering to keep pace with the ever-expanding biomedical knowledge. That certainly is a very relevant topic area. So Tom, with that, I'll give the podium to you and look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Geert, and thank you, Scott and Song and Chu, for your welcome to speak to the group today. I'm looking forward to it. Can I put up the slide on the screen, Scott?
Please just share your slides now.
Share the screen?
Yep.
Okay, well, is that showing?
You need to go in display mode.
Ah, how about that?
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. The reason I chose this title for the occasion is simply because the field of biology, I think we all recognize, is still a very young field. So there are astounding discoveries that are coming out at the level of molecules, cells, organs, and organisms, and even collections of organisms every week and every year. So unlike many fields of engineering where some of the fundamental principles have been well known for decades, in this field, it behooves us, as the origin of the field recognized 50 years ago, that we have to continuously combine the quantitative methods of engineering together with this rapidly expanding knowledge. So that's really how I organize the comments I'm going to make in about 45 minutes today. And along with this recognition that the field of bioengineering should keep this in mind, I also just want to sort of orient my comments to the larger challenges in the world to which a powerful discipline like bioengineering can in fact contribute, even though it had its origins in trying to advance human health and solve different unmet needs in healthcare. There are many large-scale challenges in the world, just to mention a few: human conflicts around the world, certainly the crisis of climate change that we all appreciate, production of food and availability of clean water, and other related challenges. And all of these, have aspects of their solution that will depend on new techniques, new approaches, and solutions coming out of bioengineering. So I want to try to allude to some of those and perhaps interest some of you in those additional challenges, because after all of them, if we don't have a world to live in, then the pursuit of human health, as a separate issue, isn't quite so prominent. So the combination of these different challenges actually might be an important aspect of expanding the frontiers of the field as well. Well, what could be some future bioengineering achievements? Here I just put a list of things that might come to pass based on current knowledge in biology and what could happen in bioengineering. We could see gene swap shops for stem cell performance. And this is an area I know Song is involved in and others. But fine tuning or tailoring stem cells either in vivo or in vitro for more native-like repairs or maintenance of organs and tissues. Biological water purification, I alluded to this, this is going to be a major issue worldwide. And certainly there are many techniques involving biological elements that are involved currently in water purification, and we could contribute to that area. An organ app store, I simply use that term because it's sort of still in vogue in Silicon Valley technology circles, but one could imagine downloading code for organ repair. In other words, not to have a kind of simplistic, crude scarring response, but rather to have a native architecture rebuilt in place, driven by an organ-specific app for that sort of recapitulation of a developmental process in situ. Plentiful clean energy. Well, right now, the highest efficiencies, are coming maybe through perovskites and other techniques in clean energy, but it's quite possible that in the future we may have highly distributed bio-based, solar energy capture. And after all, if we solve the energy problem, many of the other of the world's problems will fall in a sort of domino effect. So this is really actually a preeminent challenge facing the world right now. Immortal computer memory and Internet of Species, I put as sort of a provocative challenge because we know now that storing information, of course, in DNA, as George Church has done and others, but also passing it down in a hereditary sense, generationally, contains more information than all of the petabytes and zettabytes on today's Internet of Things. So recognizing that we may be the first dark generation on the planet. In other words, that a lot of our storage media may become obsolete in the 5, 10, 20-year period. It may be that we could adapt elements of biology to help us with longer term information storage. And this last bullet, maintaining performance throughout the lifespan, does refer to what Geert introduced. This is an investment that our foundation has just made, trying to look at human performance or optimal human physiology as a goal in and of itself, rather than spending all of our energy on trying to correct defects or consequences of disease states, but rather trying to learn what the principles of optimal performance are. And having done that, using them to prolong performance or health span, longer in life. So hopefully this could be some of the long-term goals of the field. Now, as I said, bioscience is really exploding at an unprecedented speed, and I don't probably need to tell anyone in this group this, but there are a list of signs of this, everything from the X Prize, Ken Burns making a film about the gene, the National Science Foundation getting in on bioengineering through understanding the rules of life. Actually, a group at UCSD using active genetics to try to wipe out malaria, which has not been defeated yet. Human communication with other species like plants through bioelectric or other forms of information transfer. And the last one I alluded to before, we've actually made an investment in this from our foundation as well, which is to overexpress a gene called suberin in plant crop roots, and to grow the roots at greater density and depth so that we could sequester carbon from the atmosphere into crop roots and thus take advantage of all the arable land on the planet. So in other words, not needing to cut down more forests to grow food, but to help with climate change by sequestering carbon in existing farmland. And that's actually happening at Salk Institute across the street from UCSD. What are some of the biggest deals of the decade? And here I'm just addressing, some of the industrial applications. And I see we have some industrial people in the device world in this discussion today. But some of the biggest deals of the past 10 years have been really based on bioengineering and bioscience. Bayer acquiring Monsanto and Bristol Myers Squibb acquiring Celgene. And as I say here, based on what? These were all based on bioengineering. In the case of Monsanto, seed genomics. So these were certainly bioscience directed. Here I show the full circle of innovation, just to remind people that, of course, we all know it starts with basic discovery and understanding. You have to learn something new in order to build it into a value-oriented product and launch a product. And usually once products are launched, the market sends signals back, and then you're back in the laboratory or in the design shop, making a new product because the market has indicated a need to continue around the circle. And of course, the government's interested in jobs and GDP increase and security. As bioengineers, we're all interested in human health. And I would just make the point that these are intimately related. One does not have security for a nation or the world unless one has health or lifelong wellness. And so these are intimately related goals. And of course, they require investment like from early stage to venture funding, but also philanthropic funding sometimes, particularly in the basic discovery and understanding area. And that's really what I want to focus on with some more examples today, because it's where we felt that philanthropies can step in and help start new areas or new directions when they're still very risky. In other words, not ready to go quite start around this circle yet. Another way you can think about what areas of bioengineering in which a campus at UC or other groups would want to play, or an individual laboratory or an individual student, is on the left here, solving existing problems and, as I call it, cleaning up the mess of the past, which would be things like heart disease caused by smoking, which of course we're trying to, or diabetes caused by overeating, or processed foods being in excess in a developed world, and then other things caused by environmental stressors like immune disorders, cognitive impairments, and so forth. And obviously these are needed by many people. There's a growing burden of many of these disease states on all nations in the developed world, certainly, and increasingly also in the developing world, as I think Rod pointed out in the last talk in the series. And on the right, I say there's another path, or a complementary path, which is create the new knowledge to realize a dream of your future world. In other words, what you envision you would like to be living in the future and thriving in. And so this kind of approach requires early stage discovery, because it almost always requires new knowledge generation to realize those dreams of the future. And of course, bioengineering over its 60-year or so history has played in both sides of this slide very strongly, and will continue to do so. One indication of that is that the BMES meeting I looked up this weekend hosts 150 subtracks now, which is really amazing when you think about it. And I thought about this, and one way to think about it is that a bioengineering major, in terms of in an educational sense at the UC campuses, is about 15 courses or so, or at least semester courses. I didn't translate that into quarters, but that means that a given student of bioengineering can only study 1/10 of these 150 subtracks approximately. And if it takes 4 years to get a certain amount of experience, then it would take you 40 years of a career to cover all 150 subtracks. So this field has really expanded and covers a lot of ground. And the point I want to make about the UC bioengineering campuses is that, of course, as we all know, it's, the UC system is the greatest and most diverse educational and research enterprise on the planet. So UC bioengineering is in a very unique position in that I would argue and hope that the UC campuses will continue to celebrate their differences, because I think by each pursuing different paths and having different expertise sets, you have some hope of having the system cover some reasonable fraction of these 150 sub areas, and hopefully some of the new challenges that I'm going to mention in the rest of my talk. So I think UC is really in a fantastic position to invent this future or contribute to it. Okay, a little word about philanthropy, since now I'm speaking representing the world of philanthropy. You know, a brief history of philanthropy would be that 4,000 years ago in Egyptian sacred writings, it was written that successful passage to the afterlife depended on a lifetime record of benevolent acts. So the pressure's on all of us to pursue some benevolent acts, I guess. Now, the Salk Institute in San Diego, of course, is one of the most famous examples because of its success in eradicating a major human disease, polio, from the US, and close within reach from the planet, which is admirable and was backed initially by a philanthropic contribution. The Rockefeller Green Revolution is another very well-known example of successful philanthropic investment, where it led to massive increases in food crop production. So the yield was increased. Now, of course, Rockefeller's realized that yield, or the mass of food, is not the only thing that's important, but it's actually the composition of the food that's important to create the necessary diversity of nutrition that human beings need in their lifetime. So they've actually done some new things, which I'm going to mention later. And others I just mentioned here to bring us up rapidly up to the modern world. So Paul Allen, of course, created the Brain Atlas, and it was shared openly. The novelty of that investment was that all that data was shared freely. And many people took the data there as a starting point, and it has led to new drug candidates for neurodegenerative disease and other things that perhaps wouldn't have happened if they hadn't have used the open science model that they did. And of course, you all know CZI and Chan Zuckerberg initiatives. They're funding a large coordinated cell atlas. Gates, of course, is focused on global health and infectious disease. Bezos and Mackenzie Scott separately are focusing on different aspects of Alzheimer's and healthcare and so on. And there are many others that I'm not mentioning here, but clearly philanthropy can play a role in both well-known and existing challenges, and sometimes in opening new directions. One thing you may not have thought about is what the scale of this is. Total philanthropic giving usually tracks S&P 500 performance, you know, the stock market. And this is just an example from about, I think, 2 years ago. But what's interesting to me when I looked at it this way is that religions and education takes up a gigantic chunk of this. In other words, things people care personally about because they've had an education and give back to an educational organization, or religion because of a faith. And health, arts and culture, environment, things that involve some aspects of science and creativity, creating new knowledge or new works, is actually much lower. And even within, you could argue that's, you know, the size of one federal agency or approximately. So it's actually much less. And actually within this amount, there's a very small fraction, maybe 5%, that goes to what I would call basic knowledge creation. So it's actually not a huge amount. And so in a way, how we think about it is that it's important to be directed at, as Garrett said, at frontiers or ideas that maybe haven't been taken up yet by some of the existing larger government organizations. Now, here's a comment that came out that was a little bit shocking about, that kind of was challenging. This is a couple of years ago by Bloomberg, that the US has dropped out of the top 10 in innovation ranking. But the same year, the Wall Street Journal published an article that the Enlightenment is working, meaning that, you know, the experimental method and the creation of knowledge through, you know, evidence-based research is actually improving the world in every way, reducing violence and conflict and improving peace and improving standards of living and wellness and so forth. So the question is, are we becoming obsolete, or is the world improving in every way? You know, which is right? But to me, these two articles, which appear to be paradoxically, you know, different, are really saying the same thing. What they're saying is we need to keep creating and applying new knowledge. And so, you know, a perspective from some of the founders I've worked with who've made their wealth in different industries and then thought about how best they could contribute to this process of increasing knowledge, which then finds its way to new products and human health, is, in my mind, captured best by this comment by Paul Allen. You may not know, he wrote the code for Microsoft in 1975 in 3 months, or here it says 2 months. And so he says, I found my path in that 2-month rush of creativity back in 1975. Having that kind of impact forever changes your sense of purpose in life. It's a feeling you'll always want to find again. I'm still a dreamer, more intrigued by what might be doable, and I want to keep my thinking forward-looking and unconstrained. What's next? And so it was such a pleasure, to work with someone who had this mindset, because what he was really looking for was that thing where he could find the adrenaline rush of really working on something completely new that, if successful, would really impact the world in a positive way. So really, he cared a lot about knowledge creation, as do the founders of my current organization, Joe and Clara Tsai. And here's a perspective from a humanist, essentially saying the same thing. There was never a great scientist who didn't make bold guesses, and there was never a bold person whose guesses were sometimes not wild. And so I think it's important that we all keep this in mind, that when you have the chance to try something, you really should. Okay, so what does the future hold? To reiterate what I've been trying to say and provoke you into perhaps behaving in a manner that would lead to larger impact. It's a powerful discipline that we've all been part of growing over the last 60 years. And its impacts well beyond human health could extend into this whole list that I put up on the screen here. And you all know the first 3 are obvious. The rural-urban continuum, I think, is something that people don't think about enough. But obviously the world's population is being concentrated in megacities, but megacities depend on the country for its livelihood, as has been obvious in supply chain and food shortages in the last couple of years with COVID, and now with the invasion of Ukraine, which is a big breadbasket for Europe. So this continuum is very important and involves bioengineering at many points. Benevolent regionalism is something, again, we're seeing a lot of people now beginning to talk about, which means that whether it's having a maker space to make nano-engineered stem cell, culture devices regionally, or growing your own food regionally, or delivering your own healthcare regionally in a crisis, or even in normal conditions, will become more and more important. So thinking about this idea of regionalism and how bioengineering is affected by that could be important. And of course, AI and digital systems and environmental sustainability are huge forces in the world, and bioengineering should be part of them, not pulled by them. We should actually be a driver within them, helping them to solve their challenges in an appropriate way for human well-being. All right. Here's some existing areas of bioengineering research. And what I just want to mention some things happening at the UC bioengineering campuses, because it's very impressive, number one, and shows the diversity, and then contrast it with some other opportunities, or not contrast it, but add to it other possibilities to see how these might fit together. So here's some existing areas. And I just picked these to be exemplary. Obviously, I cannot be comprehensive. And so I'm just trying to show the sweep of what's happening at the campuses, which you all know, I know from your retreats and so forth. But injectable micro rods for orthopedic regeneration by Tsai at UCSF. Well, that's an existing area that's been around, and that's a senior leader at a UC campus. Well, although I guess we'll soon be leaving the UC campus for the East Coast. But what's interesting is that despite tissue engineering and regeneration being old challenges now in bioengineering, here's a new approach that might lead to a more native-like structure in an orthopedic repair rather than a sort of patch with non-native materials. The cell reprogramming by Downing at UCI is interesting because it's a young person. So another thing that's important is to continue to have young people bring new ideas into bioengineering. And cell reprogramming is probably one of the most powerful things that's come out of advances in modern bioscience. The idea that maybe even the definition of the stem cell was not even ever right, but that we can reprogram a cell essentially infinitely to go backwards or forwards in its set of lineage states. That is a very important concept. And if we could engineer those states through reprogramming. That's a very important step. Skeletal muscle regeneration via myogenic stem cells by Song at UCLA. Well, there's another senior leader, but working on a problem that's been very recalcitrant to solution by standard methods. So, hopefully by engineering in the right type and amount and location and so forth of stem cells, will be able to handle large volume or even small volume repairs in skeletal muscle. UC Merced is a very new campus, but here we have a young person, Wu, working on morphogenesis of gut epithelium. I thought this is significant because it shows the sweep of bioengineering today, and that we are still paying attention to new knowledge and maybe trying to go back to first principles in this case to understand that architecture of the epithelium in order to help with certain of the diseases that are dependent on gut inflammation and so forth. Photo-switchable molecules for cancer therapies by Wilson at UC Santa Barbara. Cancer, of course, has been the subject of a war, the war on cancer, for about 40 years now, and we haven't won that war. So, continuing to apply new ideas in molecular design to cancer therapeutics is an important almost responsibility of bioengineering. And so this is a kind of continuing and ongoing effort, but with new talent being infused. Multi-scale modeling of muscle tissue states, to be general about it, by Andrew McCullough at UCSD. This is an extremely important area in our mind, and this is a part of our Performance Alliance, by the way. Andrew's leading the Institute for Engineering and Medicine at UCSD, and he's bringing this multi-scale modeling to the human performance effort, which we saw as extremely important, because too often new discoveries at the molecular level are not linked effectively to beneficial changes at the organ level or the organism level. And we felt like one of the only ways to do this still today is through multi-scale modeling, because it's just too hard to do all of the experiments that you can otherwise attack through multi-scale modeling. At UC Davis, of course, here's a young person, Fan, working on PET imaging of early Alzheimer's biomarkers. I put this one as an example because Alzheimer's has had no solution. There have been billions of dollars spent on Alzheimer's solutions, and we really don't even know, A, how it starts and develops, and nor do we have early biomarkers. So any drug that does show promise is very hard to bring to market because the markers really don't exist yet. So this is an example of bioengineering in technology, imaging technology, contributing a critical step really to make any headway on this disease state, which is going to be a crushing burden on healthcare costs in this country and around the world in the next 10 or 20 years. UC Riverside, another relatively new campus. Here I put an example of deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's, because again, the origins of Parkinson's is a very diverse disease. It's not purely inherited or genetically based. And so using technology to deal with some of the symptomatic effects of Parkinson's is an excellent use of technology in bioengineering also. So that's an extremely diverse set of approaches from UC Bioengineering. And I just want to now add a few things that we could all think about together in terms of that come from global bioscience. So one would be, this new technology of genetic barcoding that was introduced by Jay Shendere at Harvard and University of Washington. But the idea that you can track cell lineages backwards and forwards now and allows us to think maybe about designing tissue replacements. And that would be a very useful technology to bring to bear on the still unsolved challenges of tissue engineering. The idea of using bioelectric code to reprogram tissue shape. This is being done by Mike Levin at Tufts University. And this is one of the Allen Centers that we funded about 5 years ago. But he was able, and this example shows that just using bioelectric programming, grow an eye in a blind tadpole that actually was connected to the brain and could generate sight. And the point being that there are, in a developed organism, bioelectric patterns in existing tissues that exist above the level of the genetic code. In other words, they weren't pre-programmed by inherited genetic code, the DNA code. They were put in place as the organism developed. And by transferring information through the bioelectric code of existing biological structures, we may be able to manipulate repair processes effectively. And this sort of challenges the central dogma, really, of biological science, of gene protein function, by arguing that there's sort of a software code above the level of the genome. This is just another thought that a portion of our bioengineering design work should be directed, of course, at current challenges. I mean, the incredible response, for example, to COVID by many device companies, like Eric Engelson's Lucira company to produce, the first home test, is extremely necessary, needed, and won't go away anytime soon. So there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for bioengineering in all of these disease states I list here. And then there could be a portion of research in bioengineering that's not targeted to current industries or applications. And this is often where major disruptions can happen. So I put a couple examples here. We think about the fact we don't even know where proteins are assembled in the cell right now. That would suggest we haven't fully understood biological science, either biologically or in engineering terms. So if we looked at protein transport and mapping protein assembly processes, maybe that could be sort of the next Google Earth, except for protein assembly. So if we really get a handle on that. And that would, if we had that, that would mean one could go in with design processes, perhaps to design reparative protein assembly when needed. Organ ecosystems modeling and immunology. By this, I mean studying various organ systems, which is partly done in lab on a chip settings, but it's partly done experimentally. And combining that with immunology, perhaps we could find our way to evolution-proof vaccines rather than having the current scenario where they need to be produced de novo and manufactured quickly and so forth. So I want to, just give this message that we should always be asking, what would we never do? In other words, not being trained in things that worked before and trying to apply incrementally to the next challenge, but think about things we haven't done yet, because this is still a young field. Here's another couple examples. What about things like perfect pitch or photographic memory? I mean, these are aspects of human performance that we simply don't understand how they work. But if we could understand how they work, gain that new knowledge could be applicable to multiple tissue states and designing them for optimal performance. So a couple of thoughts about what is new to add to the things that are already happening at UC Bioengineering and other places. One idea that's come out lately is this idea from Feng Zhang at the Broad Institute, and others in gene editing, including Jennifer Doudna and David Schaefer at UC Berkeley. But it's that if we get gene editing to work really well in situ, in vivo, one could imagine a future that there's literally a 10-minute one-stop shop for gene therapy, that you identify what gene or series of genes are responsible for a particular disease state and edit them to a benign or a more positive state. So that's exciting, but I would argue it's really not enough. And a lot of people are thinking about it. And the reason it's not enough is because cell targeting is still completely unsolved. And actually, you heard a lot about this in the last talk in the series, I see, but it's not solved yet. And in the picture at the bottom, I showed some work by David Schaefer at UC Berkeley, targeting hippocampus cells, because if you wanted to do selective therapy in the brain, you have to get your therapies to where they're intended to go. So there's some progress being made on this targeting problem, but it's really an unsolved problem right now. I mentioned the Human Performance Alliance, of which one part is at UC San Diego. And our goal here is to really understand the molecules produced by human exercise and then link them forward to system states, both cell states and then to tissue states and then organism states. So muscle, bone, tendon, ligament, and so forth, even cognitive performance. And again, the idea here is that we're not going to look at disease, but we're going to look at thriving, optimal physiology, and try to put that in place throughout the lifespan. Understanding organ interactions is a new area. In a way, it's an old area because it's how Arthur Guyton wrote his textbook on physiology years ago, but it's not so highly studied in the world of bioengineering. You know, one example I do know of is with Geert Schmidt-Schoenbein at UCSD studying these long distance interactions of the GI enzymes on other organ systems. That's just one example. But another example would be bioelectric medicine. You know, the idea that you could put in microelectrodes and stimulate in reverse fashion, hormonal discharges, for example, in the sympathetic system and gain some health benefit would be an example of that as well. The respiratory microbiome with COVID, we've all paid attention to the gut microbiome, but the microbiomes in other parts of the body, particularly the respiratory system, is a huge untouched area that deserves attention. The last bullet, I'll say more about this in a minute, but understanding individual cognition. So we have funded a large institute at Yale University recently focused on cognition, but beyond that, what hasn't been studied extensively really anywhere in the world is what about when you put multiple neural organisms together, shall I say, multiple brains together, multiple people together? Because there's certainly evidence today that even in an interaction like this one by Zoom, when ideas are being exchanged between different heads, that there are chemical changes that are permanent, even epigenetic changes that will result from the exchange of information between individuals. So, and obviously inter-individual interactions result in collective intelligence, one would hope, or sometimes conflict, as we see happening in Eastern Europe right now. But understanding collective or social intelligence, I think, will be a huge challenge and will require tremendous contributions from bioengineering. Here's a few more. Interspecies interactions. And now obvious ones here would be humans and plant and animal foods, because we all eat foods. This is the genes plus environment equal health equation. But we really don't know much about our foods right now. There are plenty of supplements and so forth, but they're mostly anecdotal and done through marketing efforts and not really through scientific efforts. So understanding interspecies interactions is really going to be an important and growing area of bioengineering, and including human-animal synergies. I put this painting here by Marc Chagall because a lot of people will recognize it, but he came from a small village in Eastern Europe, actually, and you can see the connection between the animal and the human. And his belief, in that case, sort of a mystical belief, not a bioengineering belief, was that the humans found their link to the larger universe or the world through animals, because being close to animals, they recognize the interdependence of all species. And the same has now been recognized scientifically or quantitatively through the microbiome, where we know that we're all living with these hundreds of other organisms in our bodies. So I think just paying attention to interspecies interactions will become a larger part of education and engineering in bioengineering. Related to that, there's a very interesting effort funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, where UC Davis is heavily involved, which is to provide this first catalog of chemical compounds in foods. Right now, amazingly, we don't know what we put on our plate every day. This may amaze some of you, but the FDA only checks a few things like bacteria in meat once in a while and things of this nature. We really don't know what's in most of the fruits and vegetables, but it's not insurmountable by today's data standards. It's estimated that there, in all of the menus around the world, in all cultures, not just the US, there are probably about 30,000 chemical compounds. So not big data by today's big data standards. So having this first catalog, and this is being done by mass spec of the foods that are being produced around the world. We'll have the ability to then look at interactions of these chemical compounds as they're ingested with our genomes. And so we'll look at the interaction of the input with the control system in our body and see how we could optimize nutrition for human thriving as well. I think, and this is really a groundbreaking, this will only be done once in history, that we create this catalog of what's actually in our foods. And it's another sign that biology is still a young field in my mind, because it's kind of amazing that we've not known this before now. The last bullet is just on learning from evolutionary extremes. And this has always been done really in science and bioengineering, right? Because we always look at, the killer T cell or some effector cell or a stem cell with a remarkable property of acquiring a progenitor state and so forth. And so it's not a new idea, but I think if you look at NIH, I think there's only about 12 or 13 model organisms. And if you compare that, to the millions of organisms on the planet, it really says we've been limiting our science by not considering more species as we conduct our research and gain the knowledge that then allows us to design specific solutions. The example I put here is Kim Cooper, who's at UCSD, studying jumping dynamics in particular rodents and how that depends on limb morphology and structure. So I think there'll be more and more use of learning from evolutionary extremes, because after all the behaviors we can observe today come in the end from evolution. So probably evolution should become part of bioengineering curricula as well, since it's such a useful concept. So a couple last thoughts. Many diseases haven't seen much progress. This is just sort of a sobering thought. Neurodegeneration, certainly, billions of dollars with absolutely no results in Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Arthritis, I asked Carrie Athanasiou at UCI, can I have a cartilage patch to drop into a knee defect? They said, no, not yet. It's close, but still not there. So we really need to do more for arthritis. Heart disease, which has been a focus at UCSD and UCLA and other places, hearts that have been impaired still heal with abnormal structure, not with normal performing structure. So we really should ask why. And can we think of any new directions, maybe using some of those approaches I just mentioned, for making new progress on some of these recalcitrant disease states? Now, some other major forces in the world today, bioengineering should definitely be paying attention to, and I know is in some ways. So data, artificial intelligence, AI, and computing and modeling. Obviously, computing and modeling has been used in bioengineering for years, but data and science and so forth has grown in every industry vertical by leaps and bounds in the last 5 years. And I would say that we really need to ensure that today's dumb AI systems get smarter. To put it simply, my AI system on my current television doesn't even know if I'm a native English speaker or not when it asks me what captions I'd like to have. So, why is that? It's not because it's not capable of it. It's because the people coding it chose to program the algorithm a certain way. And so most machine learning right now is seeking patterns and sequences. This is how current coders, computer scientists, and engineers, I suppose, are thinking. So we may have a sort of anthropomorphic blindness here that we're not using the data and AI in the optimal way. I'll give you one example. There's no one really working on dignity-based AI, so that you build an algorithm that would really serve the customer or the consumer in a way that preserves human dignity, which is something that everyone wants worldwide. If you did, it could do things that Rod Pettigrew addressed in his lecture about decreasing blood pressure, even inflammation, improving equity worldwide. So there are a lot of things where bioengineering could play in where we're not looking right now to be a factor. Another one would be epigenetics and engineering a life. Obviously, this is a major new thinking in the world of life science, that the epigenetic marks can, in some ways, become inheritable. So the question would become, what traits do you want to gain from your experience and pass on to the next generation? sort of the ultimate form of democratizing innovation. And certainly systems bioengineers should get into this and participate in what you could call intergenerational bioengineering. It's been done in the liberal arts for millennia, right? Through storytelling, like the rabbit and the hare here. And bioengineering could do it quantitatively because we could engineer in experiences that get passed down. Another breakthrough, this is the last one I'm going to show, is that the breakthrough of the year in 2021 was computational. It was computational design of proteins by a group at Washington led by David Baker. And this is something that our foundation was involved with funding, so we're proud of it. But what he did was he used AI to predict thousands of protein-protein interactions. And that's what you see on the cover here. If you read this article, you see all these little yellow, white, and gray units. They're protein interaction pairs. And obviously what that opens up is that now you have a better idea of binding pockets for new drug development. So the drug industry, venture capital has leaped at this new breakthrough. And this is also interesting because it was done at a public university by a small research team. And in a way, they outperformed Google's DeepMind, which was the co-awardee of this breakthrough. And so my question would be, are there parallels for information transfer or structural repairs of tissues, for example, involving carbohydrates and lipids? Obviously, there's information and structure in those materials. An example was, this sort of negative example in Nature in 2022, this year, using a modified version of Megacin that prized toxicity in their algorithmic, training method, and they discovered new bioweapons. So they sent out a warning, like, watch out, these methods are going to be used for bioweapons. But the positive would be the last bullet. Can bioengineering use the same kind of tactic to algorithmically prize organ wellness or performance and discover new health-directed compounds with that kind of algorithmic approach? So that, I think that's a huge opportunity. Oh, and sorry, I have a last kind of larger landscape comment. I looked at the NIH Pioneer Awards, and I'm sure you all do this, but here's just a set of them from last year. Viral tools for body-brain circuits, synaptic dynamics, because we don't understand why the brain is such a great computer compared to all existing human-produced computers, cell type targeting, inheritance of behavior. So there's one about epigenetics. What's interesting is there's none from the UC system. There's only one from the West Coast. I don't know why. And 6 of 10 of them were on brain and neural topics. And this is sort of reflects the current hot topic of neural engineering, or the decade of the brain. But my suggestion would be maybe UC bioengineering can head in the opposite direction of some of these kind of common topics and compete for some of these. The last one I see from bioengineering was Jennifer Alicieff at Hopkins, who was using T cells to regenerate tissues, which she called a, quote, reimagining of the immune system as a repair system. So there's a heading in the opposite direction kind of approach that was well received at that particular funding agency. So my final message is, as Mark Twain said, you can't depend on your eyes if your imagination is out of focus. So sometimes it's not just the data, but it's what you choose to work on and imagine as the future. And as Erwin Jacobs said at UCSD, I learned how to think. I would hope future bioengineering alumni would say at UC Bioengineering, I learned to trust my imagination, because you're inventing the future there. And my best example of this is the Bird executive here, looking at the data on the wall, which is the hour of rising, and the worm acquisition. So obviously the early bird gets the worm is the brilliant executive insight here. And you could call that strategy or creativity or bioengineering, but if you change it to the stage of research and value creation, I guess what I would like to leave you with is that looking at this sweet spot here very, very early is appropriate for bioengineering still, because we're still a young field and we should be following the incredible expansion of knowledge in bioscience. Thank you.
Of course, the virtual applause that
Tom, thank
you
you.
see but don't hear.
Yeah, Tom, thank you for a marvelous train of thoughts. I think Song Lee is going to lead the discussion.
Yeah, we're going to hand it over to Song Lee. And we're going to, some of the folks on the panel, I want to in particular thank Kathy Ferrara, who is part of the executive committee from the Cal Academy that chose the speakers that we have here. And but now we can open up for questions. And I would just ask everybody to type their questions into the box, into the chat box, and that way folks that aren't on the panel can get those questions in there. Thank you.
Great, Tom. Thank you for your wonderful talk and sharing your vision of bioengineering. For panelists, if you have questions, please raise your hand. And for other audience, please type your questions in QA, and then we can address that. So Tom, maybe I can start with a question regarding what we should advise for the trainees and next generation of bioengineers. You talk about so many frontiers of bioengineering in a lot of examples. So for the trainees, how can they pursue their career in bioengineering research? And there's so many things they can do. In what are the directions they could look into? You know, what's your advice on how they approach for so many options?
Yeah, that's a good question, which my own son is dealing with right now. Well, that's why I put up that comment about 150 subtracks in the BMES meeting. It's almost overwhelming. Some of them are traditional areas that need to continue, like imaging, tissue engineering, biomechanics, and so forth. The new ones I noticed are on, in fact, there's one on epigenetics and there's one on women's health, both of which I think are fantastic, new additions. But I guess the advice would be, you have to pick one and involve yourself in it, because you cannot possibly cover the 150 sub areas of bioengineering. So trying to get a kind of a fundamental basis in problem solving, get a couple of hands-on experiences where you complete either a research and or a design project, hands-on, ideally with a team of other people that are different than yourself and have different skill sets, is I think the best thing you can do. And then to count on the fact that you're not closing the door to the other 130 subtracks if you choose to focus on 20, because you can always move laterally into another area by using your transferable skill sets that you gain from immersing yourself in your chosen sub area. That's really the best I could say. And because I know it's always daunting, and young people always want certainty in what they're studying, meaning that if you study X, you will acquire job Y and then progress to position Z. But in fact, if you look at most career tracks, that's not how they progress. They progress through being open to opportunity and often through lateral jumps. So I would just say they should, how should I say, pursue what they've chosen intensively and try to do it with a certain level of, mastery and competence, and then have your eyes open for lateral opportunities.
I'd like to make a quick comment, really. When you suggested that we sort of, expand the animal models that we use, I totally agree with you there. The last year I've been chair of biocook at UC Davis, and we have this huge inventory of different types of animals, as well as a non-human primate center. And, evolution, like you also discussed, evolution is the process by which a solution is arrived at after millions of years of, testing. And, certain species have evolved, and then we've even evolved from them. There's 60 million years or so that separate us from mice, yet 95% of the research is done on mice. And so I think you're totally correct. And reverse engineering how some of those evolutionary traits have come about, I think should provide clues for how it is that we then create new therapeutics, as opposed to just sort of, creating them, right from our own ideas and thoughts about what should work as opposed to what does work.
Yeah, and well, I couldn't agree more. We should maybe UC Bioengineering could write a letter to the head of NIH expressing this view, or all the chairs of IACUC committees around the country, because yeah, I think it's really constraining the usefulness of the funding that's available from the government and other sources. So, another good example, just a short one, is that, if you look at the process of tumor growth, if you ask any cancer expert about, when they detect a tumor, maybe at a 2 millimeter size, a small tumor is detected, and you ask, has this evolved? How many times has this evolved before it's been detected for the first time? And the answer is, 10 or 15 times there's been evolutionary changes already. And then you ask, well, do you include evolution in cancer training, postdocs, graduate school, et cetera? And the answer is always no. So why is it that the process we're studying involves rapid evolution, but we really don't include it in our curricula? It doesn't really make sense.
I agree. As innovative as we're as bioengineers, I think we could definitely delve more animal models that are like marsupials, for instance. You can access them as a fetus on the belly in order to understand development of, say, the immune system. And
yeah. That's a good pioneer award proposal.
Floor is open.
I see a question from Shu, which I could read, Scott. It says these are exciting new directions for bioengineering research. What do you think are the most critical elements to bring these about, besides educating outstanding bioengineering scientists? That's a tough question, but what we've tried to do with Paul Allen and with my current foundation is to use existing resources resources that are available for investment into research or R&D, and give existing scientists or young ones, either way, the opportunity to express, as Scott just did, sometimes innovative ideas that maybe go beyond what already has mainstream support. So I guess the main thing I would say is that people in positions to influence direction, and that is sometimes department chairs in the hiring processes, or faculty committees that are involved with hiring, deans of schools, sometimes presidents putting together strategic plans. Then from the government side, the funding agency, program directors, philanthropies, similarly. And then actually industry as well, who are often, hoping to find new improvements to product lines and so forth, and it's hard to do, and particularly in publicly held companies, but to set aside sort of a skunk works in that case, that's really committed to eliciting ideas that would head in new directions. I don't really think, there's not any substitute for it otherwise, because otherwise it's very easy to continue on incremental paths. And when the opportunity is presented, it's actually not that difficult to distinguish between and I mean with a group of experienced people, like a peer review sort of discussion or workshop sort of environment, not unilaterally as a foundation or an agency. It's not that hard to distinguish when a new direction is being articulated compared with an incremental progress in an existing direction. And I'm not saying that incremental is not important or good either, because obviously, it's what allowed Moderna to produce a vaccine rapidly, because we were already working on mRNA, for example. So sometimes just pushing to scale is important, but I think what's missing in the ecosystem is this giving the opportunity for new directions to be expressed and then acted on. Scott gave a great example with the limitation on the number of species that are considered model organisms, which is really obsolete now with our ability to get data on additional species. That's sort of an older one that, you know, we should get all the data we can on a limited number of species to try to get better understanding. I think that's been obsoleted by modern data acquisition and data science. Another example is when I'm blanking on the name of it. There was a Parkinson's disease roadmap produced recently, and there was a 23-person committee put together to look at, you know, what might be approaches. And initially they looked at early origins of Parkinson's disease as a big unknown. But in the end, the roadmap mostly included what I would call fairly straightforward approaches, which is let's identify the genes that are associated, and then what gene products are associated in Parkinson's with those gene changes, and then maybe try to find druggable targets associated with those gene products. And that's a fairly standard approach, which hasn't worked very well for Alzheimer's. So that in that case, that was an example of why I would say it would be mystifying. Why would we not try to go after early mechanisms or causality in Parkinson's rather than using a kind of the standard gene protein function approach, which hasn't been very effective for some of these neurodegenerative conditions?
Yeah. In pulling in some of the industry folks, I see Eric from Lucira and Don previously from Medtronic. These sorts of ideas, some of the, you know, thinking outside the box ideas, are those still resonating in industry these days? I mean, I know it's so, you get so focused on putting up, you know, getting a product out to market as opposed to coming up with the best solution. Either of you guys can comment on that.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Hey, Scott, Tom, awesome talk. That was really, you know, for me, kind of running as fast as I can quarter to quarter. It was such a breath of fresh air to be able to sit back and just think and conceptualize a little bit. And maybe, Scott, that's partially an answer to your question. It depends on the stage of the company, or in a larger company, the ability to do a skunk works, like Tom was saying. You know, these ideas that are headed toward product tend to be so fragile that there's a period of time where you don't want any review. You want to be left alone. You want to leave the right team alone and not you know, not poke at them and have them undergo review, because that can kill it. But then there's a point of transition where it's fully appropriate. I mean, we at Lucira have some new innovations that are very exciting, and we purposely left the team alone. Actually had no idea what they were doing. And then all of a sudden, voila, you know, there it is. And now it's safe to talk about it internally. But had we talked about it too early, you know, people might have thrown all sorts of requirements, et cetera, and that would have been the end of it. So, in answer to your question, it does happen, not at the level necessarily of basic science research, that, you know, but at a different level, and it's very exciting.
Yeah, I'll let you comment, Don. I just wanted to say that for the next, and this is going to be in June, Cal Academy, we're going to have a roundtable discussion between industry representatives and academics, and largely target the discussion to undergraduates and graduates, because I just don't think that they have a good sense, you know, once they get their PhD or master's or undergraduate degree, of, you know, what to expect in industry when you're, you know, working as a bioengineer, you know, and you listen to folks like Tom and or you know, Song Lee or I, you know, or myself, and you say, hey, the world's your oyster. But then you get into the reality of it, right? Don, you could speak to that, because you've been teaching undergraduates. here at UC Davis.
Yeah, I just want to comment that now, just before I left Medtronic, I saw Medtronic enter into a large agreement with IBM. And here was the first time we saw med device partnering with big data. And, I've been away for a few years now, but, I kind of wondered, where was this going? And now I think I see where it's going. If you look at the explosion of now personal home test devices, and now you could buy a kit and you could test your blood glucose, you could have continuous monitoring of blood glucose, you could have monitoring of your uric acid levels, of your blood ketones. It's just going to continue to go that direction. So we'll no longer have to go into a lab to have blood drawn. We could do it at home. All of this data now is being uploaded to smart devices, and all of this is being coordinated. So, Tom, I'd be interested to know your opinion on where you see this going in terms of med device, artificial intelligence, and big data. Yeah,
I'm glad you asked that. And first of all, I want to say, Eric, to Eric's point, A, nice to see you, Eric. And B, that was such an interesting comment you made, because you're acting as a champion to shelter an innovation from the accountants, so to speak. So, the old saying that accountants can kill anything before it gets started. And, it's the same in some of the example I was giving in answer to Shu's question. It's the same thing. There needs to be a protective champion for some of these early stage, knowledge quests in this very similar way as you described in the product development cycle. Don, to your question, I guess that's why I put up that slide about dignity-based AI, because my first reaction to what you were just saying is, I don't want Donald Trump's staff, if he gets reelected, knowing my, uric acid levels, because he may deport me to Mexico or something. So I think, there's going to be a need, and we all know wearables are coming. You're really talking about not only wearables, but maybe even, a transparent domicile where, using the permittivity of free space, we're going to have 9G networks interrogating us while we sleep. And, the question is, who has access to that data? Not just your useful smart device to prevent, fibrillation, during sleep apnea, but well beyond that, there will be social contracts that are made, and there will be wealth that's generated and concentrated based on controlling this information. And so the reason I put that slide is that, yes, there's an obvious path to more and more mobile, portable, wearable, Internet of Things devices that will upload to a cloud and to smart devices, but someone is programming them and controlling them. And then they will be also delivering me a product, right? So if my kidney function is at a certain level, right, they're going to send me something to, Scott. After he has a scotch, he may get an advertisement for better ice cubes, So I think we just have to, as bioengineers, as a discipline, make sure that we're part of designing this revolution in big data through ubiquitous sensing in a way that is actually beneficial to human health and thriving through the lifespan, and respecting privacy in the process. And that's a general comment, but obviously what you say is true. It will come to pass, which is why you see big tech companies like IBM who hey, how can we control more and more of people's personal lives and data? Well, through biomedical sensors. So in a way, even a huge company like Medtronic is just being viewed as an asset by a software company. And so I think we have to flip that a little bit, and bioengineers should be in control of that a little bit more, not just bioengineers, but in any vertical, the people that are the content producers and the value creators need to make sure they stay in touch with the value to the end customer or the citizen that is the recipient of that technology or that innovation. and not let the middleman software tech providers, extract out value while decreasing quality of life for the actual end user, which is in fact what's happening now in many uses of big tech. So it's a slippery slope. An example is one that Scott sent me an example of, this whole fiasco with the Schmidt Foundation and Eric Schmidt supporting, a member of the Office of Science and Technology Policy in the White House at the same time that Google is trying to get control of publicly funded highway systems for autonomous cars. Well, yeah, that's a conflict of interest, right? Because it's the taxpayers have paid trillions of dollars to build public highways, and now a tech company may want to take access to them ostensibly to produce better driving conditions and more safety, but really for other purposes as well. So I think we have to look closely as all of our data becomes uploaded and then used for a variety of purposes.
Yeah.
Well, clearly the future medical device is the union of the what used to be the dumb device now with artificial intelligence. So the union of a smart medical device now with artificial intelligence that is really going to change systems biology as it applies to our everyday life. And then Scott, to your question, I am seeing a real change in the demographics in my students in my class, where in the past it would just be pure BME students, and now I'm getting students that are upper division in computer science, looking to now expand their career with medical device.
Yeah, totally agree. It really harkens to how it is that we're educating our students. I teach the responsible, activity and bioethics for the graduate courses. And that's such an important, topic now, like exactly for the reasons that Tom described. And also in speaking to your point, Don, there's a lot of programs now that are bringing in MBA with BS and really mixing, disciplines, which I think is really good, because as Tom says, as we expand to 150, subtopics at BMES, it means that we have to deal with a lot more, of these social issues. But anyway, Tom, I want to thank you. I want to acknowledge Geert and Shu, who at least 3/4 of us on this Zoom call right now are the academic progeny of, and maybe a show of hands, who wants UNC tonight as compared to Kansas. And that wasn't whiskey, it was apple juice to keep me awake and energetic for the game tonight at 6:30. Anyway, thanks a lot, everybody. I really appreciate the speaker and all the panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was great.
Yeah.
A shout out to Garrett and Shu. Good to see you.
Great to see you all. Great to see you all. Yeah.
Thank
Joel,
you.
good to meet you.
Ajin and Joel for
Ajin.
showing up as well.
Ajin.
And thank you very much for including us.
Yeah. It was
See you guys.
a great event. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Yep. See you.
All right. Good night.